In the pre-dawn darkness of July 1st, 1944, as the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy still bore witness to the tremendous sacrifice of D-Day, a most extraordinary and unprecedented military unit was preparing to embark on a mission that would fundamentally challenge everything the world understood about the nature of modern warfare. They were not the battle-hardened infantry soldiers trained for direct assault operations against fortified enemy positions, nor were they the experienced tank crews ready to spearhead armored advances through hostile territory. Instead, they were artists who had traded their paintbrushes for military uniforms, engineers who had abandoned their drafting tables for foxholes, sound technicians who had left their recording studios for battlefield communications equipment, and radio operators who had exchanged their civilian broadcasting careers for the deadly serious business of military deception under enemy fire. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, destined to be remembered by history as the legendary Ghost Army, stood on the threshold of their first genuine combat operation in occupied Europe. For many long months, they had trained extensively in the relative safety of the Tennessee forests and the rolling countryside of England, meticulously perfecting sophisticated techniques of military deception that had never before been attempted on such an ambitious scale in the history of warfare. They had learned through countless hours of practice to inflate massive rubber tanks that could appear completely authentic to enemy observers positioned 1,000 yards away, to broadcast carefully recorded sound effects that could convince experienced German listeners they were hearing the genuine mechanical operations of real American artillery batteries, and to transmit elaborately coordinated radio messages that would persuade even the most skilled enemy intelligence analysts that they were successfully monitoring legitimate military communications between active American combat units. But all of that extensive and intensive training had been conducted in the comparative safety and security of friendly territory, completely protected from hostile enemy observation and entirely free from the immediate and deadly threat of German artillery fire, aerial bombing, or infantry assault. Operation Elephant would represent something entirely different and infinitely more dangerous. This ambitious and unprecedented mission would constitute their true baptism by fire, conducted deep in Nazi-occupied France within the effective range of experienced German artillery batteries and constantly under the watchful eyes of skilled enemy reconnaissance aircraft that could detect and report any suspicious American military activity to waiting German commanders. The fundamental mission concept was both elegantly simple in its strategic conception and absolutely terrifying in its practical execution requirements. The Ghost Army would simulate the presence of powerful American artillery positions so convincingly and with such meticulous attention to authentic detail that German forces would waste their precious and increasingly limited ammunition supplies attacking completely empty fields, while genuine Allied guns remained safely hidden and perfectly protected to continue their vital support of ongoing offensive operations. The ultimate success of their elaborate deception would be measured by the precise number of German artillery shells that fell harmlessly on their carefully constructed fake positions, instead on legitimate military targets where they could kill or wound real Allied soldiers. And the lives of countless American, British, and Canadian troops would depend entirely on the Ghost Army's ability to maintain their sophisticated illusions even while subjected to direct and sustained enemy artillery attack. The advance reconnaissance party of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops landed on the contested beaches of Normandy, carrying with them military equipment that represented many years of top-secret development work and the investment of millions of precious wartime dollars in intensive research and experimental engineering programs. Their remarkable rubber tanks and ingenious inflatable artillery pieces were genuine marvels of wartime engineering innovation, crafted with such extraordinary attention to authentic visual detail that they could successfully fool even experienced German military observers from distances of several hundred yards while being studied through powerful military telescopes under optimal lighting conditions. Each individual inflatable Sherman tank weighed only 125 pounds when completely deflated and carefully packed for transport. But when properly inflated using specialized compressor equipment and positioned according to authentic American armored doctrine, it created the unmistakable visual signature of a genuine 30-ton armored combat vehicle that could be reliably detected and identified by experienced German reconnaissance aircraft pilots flying systematic observation missions at operational altitudes of 10,000 feet or higher above the battlefield.
Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Reeder, the experienced and thoughtful commanding officer responsible for directing the overall success of Operation Elephant, possessed a clear and sobering understanding that his specially trained men were about to face unprecedented military challenges that no combat unit in the entire history of organized warfare had ever encountered or been required to overcome. They would function as soldiers who could never fight back when directly attacked by enemy forces, serving as warriors whose primary weapons consisted entirely of compressed air and inflated rubber rather than steel and high explosives, and operating as combat personnel whose ammunition supply was measured in cubic feet of pressurized gas rather than rounds of artillery shells or machine gun bullets. The extraordinary psychological demands of conducting such unconventional warfare were completely unprecedented in military history, requiring these specially selected men to display forms of personal courage that had never before been tested under actual combat conditions. They would be required to stand their ground and maintain their assigned positions while enemy artillery shells exploded with devastating force all around them, dedicating their lives to protecting elaborate rubber equipment that could contribute absolutely nothing to their own defense or survival, motivated only by their deep understanding that their personal sacrifice and professional dedication would directly protect the lives of other American soldiers serving in genuine combat units who possessed the capability to actually fight back against enemy forces and achieve tactical victories on the battlefield. The complex logistical challenges involved in safely transporting highly specialized inflatable equipment from the heavily contested Normandy invasion beaches to their designated operational areas deep in enemy-controlled territory were absolutely immense in their scope and complexity. The deflated tanks and artillery pieces bore no visual resemblance whatsoever to the fearsome military weapons they were specifically designed to simulate when properly inflated and positioned, appearing instead like suspicious bundles of rubber sheeting and canvas fabric that immediately aroused curiosity and suspicion from anyone who observed them closely during transport operations or temporary storage periods. French civilian populations desperately hungry for any reliable information about Allied military strength and strategic intentions after years of brutal German occupation, approached American soldiers with generous offers of practical assistance and heartfelt expressions of gratitude for their liberation that created entirely unexpected security problems the Ghost Army planners had never anticipated during their extensive preparation phases. These well-meaning French patriots and resistance sympathizers had absolutely no way of knowing that the impressive American military equipment they were observing with such hope and excitement was entirely fake and incapable of firing a single shot, and their innocent but persistent questions about American military capabilities and operational intentions threatened to expose vital operational secrets that could directly cost the lives of Allied soldiers if they reached German intelligence services. The first advance elements of the Ghost Army reached their carefully selected operational area near the strategically important village of Saint-Mère-Église during the early morning hours of July 3rd, moving exclusively under the protective cover of darkness to avoid detection by German observation posts that maintained constant surveillance of Allied activities throughout the sector. The specific operational site had been selected only after intensive terrain analysis and careful study of detailed intelligence reports indicating that experienced German artillery observers maintained regular and systematic surveillance of precisely this sector from well-concealed positions that provided excellent fields of observation across the surrounding countryside. The critical positioning of sophisticated inflatable equipment required mathematical precision and extensive knowledge of authentic American military doctrine, creating realistic battery layouts and tactical deployments that would convince experienced enemy reconnaissance personnel that they were observing completely legitimate American artillery positions manned by trained crews and ready for immediate combat operations. Every single piece of equipment had to be placed with meticulous care to create authentic sight lines, tactically sound spacing intervals, and convincing camouflage patterns that would successfully withstand detailed scrutiny from experienced German military observers equipped with powerful telescopes and possessing extensive detailed knowledge of standard American military procedures and tactical doctrine.
Staff Sergeant Harold Dahl and his specialized radio communications team faced perhaps the most technically complex and psychologically demanding challenge of the entire elaborate operation. They were required to simulate the complete communications traffic of an entire American artillery battalion, continuously broadcasting carefully coordinated messages that would be systematically intercepted and thoroughly analyzed by highly skilled German signals intelligence specialists who possessed extensive and detailed knowledge of American military radio procedures, code systems, and communications protocols developed through years of intensive study of captured American equipment and intercepted radio transmissions. Every single radio transmission had to utilize completely authentic military code words, follow proper established military communications protocol without deviation, and maintain realistic timing patterns that exactly matched what German intelligence analysts would expect to detect when monitoring the radio traffic of a genuinely active American artillery unit engaged in actual combat operations. The dedicated radio operators worked in carefully coordinated shifts around the clock without interruption, maintaining elaborate fictional conversations between completely non-existent military units while simultaneously coordinating their transmissions with the visual and audio deceptions being created and maintained by other specialized Ghost Army elements operating in the same general area. The detailed technical specifications for the advanced inflatable equipment demonstrated extraordinary attention to authentic visual detail that reflected months of intensive research and development work. Each individual rubber Sherman tank included completely authentic-looking main gun barrels with proper bore dimensions, highly realistic track patterns that matched genuine Sherman tank treads, and carefully applied unit identification markings that corresponded precisely to specific American armored divisions that were known to be operating in the European theater of operations. The sophisticated inflatable howitzers featured fully adjustable elevation mechanisms that functioned exactly like those found on genuine artillery pieces, authentic camouflage paint patterns that matched current American military specifications, and even carefully constructed simulated ammunition storage areas that could convince experienced observers that the weapons were properly supplied with shells and ready for immediate combat action. German military intelligence services possessed extensive collections of detailed photographs and precise technical drawings of American military equipment obtained through various intelligence sources, making absolute visual authenticity critically important to the success of any deception operation that hoped to fool experienced enemy analysts for extended periods. When Ghost Army radio operators broadcast a realistic fire mission request, the sound trucks had to play carefully selected recordings of artillery pieces firing at exactly the right moment and appropriate volume level to match the supposed tactical situation. When German reconnaissance aircraft flew systematic observation missions overhead, the inflatable equipment had to be positioned to create realistic shadow patterns and arranged in tactical formations that exactly matched what enemy intelligence analysts would expect to observe based on their detailed knowledge of authentic American military doctrine and standard operating procedures.
The individual men assigned to participate in Operation Elephant came from diverse civilian backgrounds that had never provided any preparation for this unique type of military service under extreme combat conditions. William Anderson had been a promising art student at the prestigious Chicago Institute of Art before the war, trained throughout his education to create works of beauty and artistic expression rather than elaborate military illusions specifically designed to deceive enemy forces and potentially influence the outcome of major battles. Technical Sergeant Martin Cohn had worked as a popular radio announcer in New York City before accepting his military assignment, using his distinctive voice and professional broadcasting skills to entertain civilian listeners rather than to transmit carefully crafted fictional military communications that could directly influence German tactical decisions and strategic planning. These highly skilled civilian specialists had voluntarily enlisted for military service with the expectation that they would contribute their specialized technical skills to the overall war effort in supporting roles behind the front lines, but they had discovered instead that their most valuable contribution to Allied victory would be their personal willingness to risk their own lives protecting elaborate rubber equipment that represented the hopes for survival of thousands of fellow American soldiers whose names they would never know and whose faces they would never see during their military service. The intense psychological pressures faced by Ghost Army personnel were completely unlike anything experienced by conventional military units engaged in traditional combat operations. Regular combat soldiers possessed the ability to take aggressive action when threatened by enemy forces, fighting back against hostile attackers and deriving significant psychological satisfaction from their capability to inflict damage on enemy personnel and equipment. Ghost Army soldiers were required to remain completely passive under sustained enemy fire, allowing German artillery shells to explode with devastating force all around them while they dedicated their efforts to protecting specialized equipment that could not defend itself or contribute in any way to offensive operations against enemy positions. The challenging combination of constant mortal danger and enforced military helplessness created severe stress reactions that military psychologists had never previously encountered or studied in any systematic way. The unique nature of Ghost Army operations meant that traditional methods of combat stress management and psychological support were inadequate for addressing the specific mental health challenges faced by personnel assigned to deception duties under enemy fire. French resistance networks operating throughout the local area created significant additional complications for the success of Operation Elephant that had not been fully anticipated during the planning phases. Local resistance fighters who had risked their lives for years gathering intelligence about German military activities were naturally eager to provide valuable information about enemy positions and to coordinate their activities with Allied forces in targeting German installations for destruction. However, these incredibly brave French patriots could not be told that the impressive American artillery they were observing with such hope and excitement was entirely fake and incapable of providing any fire support whatsoever, because security breaches could compromise not just Operation Elephant, but all future Ghost Army missions throughout the European theater. Lieutenant Colonel James Snee found himself managing extremely delicate relationships with local resistance leaders who wanted to help direct American artillery fire against specific German targets that they had identified through their dangerous reconnaissance activities, never knowing that the American guns they were counting on to support their operations could not fire even a single artillery shell. The maintenance of operational security while preserving valuable relationships with French resistance networks required diplomatic skills and careful deception techniques that had not been included in any Ghost Army training programs. The unpredictable weather conditions throughout the operational area presented constant challenges for maintaining the sophisticated visual deception under varying atmospheric conditions. Heavy rain could cause significant damage to inflatable equipment, creating visible sagging or dangerous distortion that would be immediately detected by German observers using powerful telescopes from concealed positions. Strong winds could shift carefully positioned equipment pieces out of their tactically realistic arrangements or cause inflatable components to move in obviously unnatural ways that would appear highly suspicious to experienced enemy reconnaissance personnel. Changes in natural lighting conditions caused by cloud cover, seasonal sun angles, or atmospheric haze could alter the visual signatures that German intelligence analysts were studying through systematic observation, requiring Ghost Army teams to constantly monitor and adjust their equipment positions to maintain authenticity under changing conditions. Most essential maintenance work had to be accomplished during the limited hours of darkness when German visual observation was significantly reduced, but all final positioning arrangements had to be completed before dawn to ensure that equipment positions would appear completely authentic when daylight returned and enemy observation resumed.
On July 15th, the elaborate deception operation faced its ultimate and most dangerous test when experienced German forward observers successfully identified what appeared to be a significant concentration of American artillery in the Ghost Army operational sector. Within only a few hours of the initial German reconnaissance reports reaching enemy headquarters, German artillery batteries began methodically ranging in on the fake positions with the kind of systematic precision that clearly demonstrated the complete effectiveness of the Ghost Army visual deception techniques. The distinctive and terrifying sound of incoming German artillery shells was absolutely terrifying, even for men who had trained extensively for exactly this moment throughout their military preparation. The characteristic whistle of approaching 150mm artillery rounds followed immediately by earth-shaking explosions that sent powerful shock waves through the ground and surrounding air, created an environment of pure terror that tested the personal courage and military discipline of every single man involved in the dangerous operation. Sergeant Anderson found himself crouched in a hastily constructed foxhole that provided minimal protection as German shells began exploding with devastating force around the inflatable howitzer he had personally helped to position just hours earlier during the previous night's setup operations. Each violent explosion sent countless fragments of deadly hot metal screaming through the air at velocities that could kill or permanently maim any exposed person instantly, while the tremendous concussion waves from near misses created intense physical sensations that he could feel throughout his chest and stomach as the explosions literally shook the ground beneath him. The natural human survival instinct was to immediately abandon the dangerously exposed position and seek substantially better shelter in areas farther from the target zone. But abandoning the deception at this critical moment would mean that genuine Allied artillery batteries would become primary German targets instead, potentially costing the lives of dozens of American soldiers who were depending entirely on the Ghost Army to successfully draw enemy fire away from their authentic positions, where they were providing essential fire support for ongoing Allied offensive operations. The first sustained German bombardment of Ghost Army positions revealed both the tremendous potential and the significant limitations of the sophisticated deception techniques that had been developed through months of intensive research and testing.
The extremely positive news was that German artillery units were indeed targeting the fake positions with exactly the same intensity and systematic approach they would normally direct against genuine high-priority military threats, conclusively confirming that the visual deceptions were sophisticated enough to successfully fool even experienced enemy observers who possessed extensive knowledge of American military equipment and tactical procedures. The significantly more concerning development was that several valuable inflatable equipment pieces had suffered damage from shell fragments during the bombardment, and the Ghost Army personnel were rapidly discovering that maintaining realistic equipment positions under actual combat conditions was far more difficult and dangerous than anything they had experienced during their extensive training exercises conducted in the safety of Allied territory. Technical challenges mounted steadily as Operation Elephant continued under increasingly difficult combat conditions. The American compressor units that were essential for inflating and maintaining the rubber equipment had been designed and manufactured for relatively brief periods of operation under controlled workshop conditions, but the demanding requirements of combat operations necessitated continuous operation for extended periods, while being subjected to severe vibrations from nearby shell impacts and exposure to weather conditions that significantly exceeded the original design specifications established by the manufacturers. Compressor failures could cause critical pieces of deception equipment to deflate at precisely the moments when German reconnaissance aircraft were conducting systematic observation flights over the operational area, potentially exposing the entire elaborate deception and endangering not just Operation Elephant, but the operational security of all future Ghost Army missions throughout the European theater of operations. Maintenance personnel had to develop innovative field repair techniques for keeping essential equipment operational under conditions that had never been anticipated during the original development phases.
The inflatable equipment itself presented numerous practical problems that had not been fully anticipated during the extensive development and testing phases conducted in England. The inflatable half-track decoys did not create convincing visual impressions when viewed from certain critical angles, particularly from elevated positions the German ground observers were likely to occupy when conducting systematic surveillance of American positions. Ghost Army officers were forced to make difficult tactical decisions about positioning these pieces to minimize exposure of their least realistic visual aspects, while ensuring that they continued to contribute effectively to the overall deception operation. The specialized air compressor units had to be operated for carefully timed periods each day to maintain proper inflation pressure in all rubber components, but the distinctive mechanical noise produced by compressor operation could be detected by German acoustic surveillance specialists using sensitive listening equipment, and had to be carefully coordinated with legitimate mechanical sounds that would naturally be expected around authentic American military positions engaged in normal operations. The complex challenges of loading and transporting the specialized inflatable equipment required the development of techniques that had been learned through difficult practical experience rather than theoretical planning. Most of the rubber components had been designed and manufactured in England before the specific operational requirements of Operation Elephant had been fully determined, and the original engineers had not adequately considered the practical requirements of moving deflated equipment through active combat zones, where every vehicle movement was subject to enemy observation and potential artillery attack. The actual numbers and types of equipment that had to be loaded on available transport trucks had been estimated during planning phases, but real operational requirements often exceeded available transport capacity, forcing Ghost Army commanders to make difficult tactical decisions about which deception elements were most critical to overall mission success and which could be temporarily eliminated or delayed without compromising the effectiveness of the operation. Radio deception operations achieved new levels of technical sophistication and complexity as Operation Elephant progressed through its various phases.
Corporal Cohen and his specialized communications team were maintaining elaborate fictional communications networks that successfully simulated not just artillery units, but also the complex logistics, medical, and administrative support elements that would be required to support such units during actual combat operations. Their carefully coordinated transmissions had to include realistic discussions of ammunition supply status, personnel strength reports, equipment maintenance requirements, and tactical coordination with higher headquarters elements. German signals intelligence specialists possessed extensive and detailed files on American military communications procedures that had been developed through years of intensive study of captured equipment and intercepted radio transmissions, and any deviation from established patterns would immediately raise suspicion about the authenticity of the radio traffic they were monitoring. The Ghost Army radio operators had to study actual American military radio procedures with extraordinary attention to detail and develop increasingly sophisticated methods for simulating the complex interactions between different types of military units operating under various tactical conditions. The coordination challenges between different specialized elements of the Ghost Army operation were absolutely enormous in their scope and complexity. Visual deception specialists had to ensure that their carefully positioned inflatable equipment created tactically realistic patterns that exactly matched the unit organizations being simulated by radio operators working in the same operational area. Sound technicians were required to synchronize their audio effects precisely with both visual and radio elements, creating complex soundscapes that included appropriate mechanical noises, realistic human voices, and authentic equipment sounds that matched the supposed tactical situation.
Unpredictable weather conditions, unexpected enemy action, and inevitable mechanical failures constantly disrupted carefully planned coordination between different deception elements, requiring continuous adaptation and creative improvisation by specialized personnel who were operating under extreme stress and constant danger, while maintaining their elaborate deceptions under enemy observation and potential attack. French civilian interactions became increasingly problematic and potentially dangerous as Operation Elephant continued through its scheduled phases. Local farmers and village residents, observing what appeared to be significant American military activity in their immediate area after years of German occupation, began approaching Ghost Army positions with generous offers of practical assistance, valuable intelligence about German troop movements, and heartfelt expressions of gratitude to Allied forces for finally liberating their homeland from Nazi control. These well-meaning encounters created serious security risks that directly threatened operational success, but they also provided unexpected opportunities to gather extremely valuable intelligence information about German defensive preparations, patrol patterns, and tactical dispositions that could be useful for planning future Allied operations in the region. Managing these sensitive civilian contacts required specialized diplomatic skills and careful security procedures that had not been included in original Ghost Army training programs. German infantry patrols began conducting systematic probing operations against Allied positions as enemy commanders attempted to gather more detailed and reliable intelligence about American military capabilities and tactical intentions in their sector. Unlike German artillery observers who studied potential targets from safe distances of several miles using powerful telescopes, enemy infantry scouts could approach close enough to discover that impressive-looking American tanks were actually inflatable rubber constructions that could be damaged by small arms fire. Ghost Army personnel were required to coordinate their security requirements with regular American infantry units to establish effective perimeters around sensitive deception sites, but this essential coordination had to be accomplished without revealing the true nature of the operation to conventional troops who were not cleared to access information about specialized deception activities. The maintenance of operational security while ensuring adequate protection required careful planning and continuous coordination between different types of military units with varying security clearance levels.
Intelligence reports began indicating clearly that Operation Elephant was successfully achieving its primary strategic objectives, despite the numerous technical and operational challenges that had been encountered. German artillery units were expending significant quantities of increasingly scarce ammunition on Ghost Army positions, precious shells that were not being fired at legitimate Allied targets, where they could inflict actual casualties or damage to genuine military equipment. Enemy commanders appeared to believe, based on their analysis of available intelligence, that they were facing much larger American artillery concentrations than actually existed in their operational sector, causing them to reinforce defensive positions that were not actually under any threat, while leaving other strategically important areas inadequately defended against attacks by genuine Allied forces equipped with real weapons and capable of achieving actual tactical objectives. The significant personal cost of maintaining sophisticated deceptions under sustained combat conditions was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone involved in the dangerous operation. Living under constant threat of enemy artillery attack while being completely unable to fight back against their attackers created intense psychological stresses that conventional military training programs had not adequately prepared them to handle effectively.
Unlike regular combat soldiers who could take aggressive action when threatened by enemy forces, deriving psychological satisfaction from their ability to fight back and inflict damage on hostile forces, Ghost Army personnel were required to remain completely passive under enemy fire, allowing German shells to explode with devastating force all around them, while they dedicated their efforts to protecting specialized equipment that could not defend itself, retaliate against attackers, or contribute to offensive operations against enemy positions. The challenging combination of constant mortal danger and enforced military helplessness was creating unique stress reactions that differed significantly from the combat fatigue experienced by conventional military units engaged in traditional fighting operations. Military medical personnel had no previous experience treating the specific psychological symptoms that were developing among Ghost Army personnel subjected to sustained enemy fire while being unable to respond aggressively. Captain Oscar Seal, the experienced officer commanding Combat Command A, observed through careful study of his men that they were developing distinctive forms of combat stress that required completely new approaches to military leadership and personnel support systems. These specially trained soldiers were displaying remarkable personal courage under circumstances that had absolutely no precedent in the entire history of organized military operations. But they needed recognition that their service was as valuable and dangerous as that performed by conventional combat units engaged in direct fighting against enemy forces. The ultimate success of future Ghost Army operations would depend not just on continued technical improvements to specialized deception equipment and procedures, but also on developing significantly better methods for supporting the psychological welfare and mental health of personnel assigned to deception duties under combat conditions, where they faced all the dangers of conventional warfare while being denied the psychological satisfaction of fighting back against their attackers. The invaluable technical lessons learned during Operation Elephant provided crucial information for improving future Ghost Army capabilities and operational effectiveness. Engineers discovered that inflatable equipment required more robust anchoring systems to prevent wind damage, and that careful attention to drainage was absolutely necessary to prevent water accumulation inside rubber components that could cause visible distortion detectable by enemy observers. Equipment positioning procedures had to account for seasonal changes in natural vegetation and varying lighting conditions that could alter the visual signatures observed by German reconnaissance aircraft conducting systematic surveillance of Allied positions.
Sound equipment required better weatherproofing and more reliable power systems that could operate continuously under harsh combat conditions without revealing their true nature to enemy acoustic surveillance specialists. Radio deception techniques were systematically refined based on careful analysis of German responses to Ghost Army transmissions and intelligence reports about enemy reactions to the deception operation. German signals intelligence capabilities were sophisticated enough to detect subtle inconsistencies in American communications procedures, requiring radio operators to study actual military radio traffic with even greater attention to detail and to develop better methods for simulating the complex interactions between different types of military units under various operational conditions.
The essential coordination between radio deception and other elements of the Ghost Army required significant improvement, particularly in the precise timing of various components of complex deception scenarios where visual, audio, and communications elements had to be perfectly synchronized to create convincing overall impressions that could withstand systematic analysis by experienced enemy intelligence specialists. Perhaps most importantly, Operation Elephant demonstrated conclusively that the fundamental Ghost Army concept was strategically sound and tactically valuable under actual combat conditions. German forces could indeed be successfully deceived by sophisticated illusions, even when those illusions were maintained under actual combat conditions by personnel who were subjected to sustained enemy attack and constant mortal danger. The substantial investment in specialized training, advanced deception equipment, and personnel development was completely justified by measurable results in terms of enemy ammunition expended on false targets, German forces misdirected from their optimal defensive positions, and Allied casualties prevented through successful deception operations that protected genuine military units from enemy detection and attack. As Operation Elephant concluded in early August with the successful completion of its primary mission objectives, the Ghost Army began intensive preparations for even more ambitious deception missions that would support the continuing Allied advance toward Paris and eventually toward the heavily defended German border. They had proven conclusively that their sophisticated techniques could work effectively under sustained enemy fire, but future operations would present entirely new challenges, requiring mobile deceptions that could maintain their effectiveness while keeping pace with rapidly advancing Allied forces engaged in fluid combat operations. The static deceptions that had been successful in Operation Elephant would need to evolve into dynamic operations capable of supporting constantly changing battlefield conditions where unit positions changed daily and deception requirements had to be continuously adapted to match evolving tactical situations and enemy responses to Allied operations. The men who had survived their first genuine combat test were no longer the enthusiastic volunteers who had trained in the comparative safety of American training camps and English countryside facilities. They had become hardened specialists in a completely unique form of warfare that existed nowhere else in military history. Seasoned veterans of battles where victory was measured not in territory gained or enemies killed, but in the technical sophistication of illusions maintained under extreme danger and the professional skill demonstrated in protecting fellow soldiers through elaborate deception rather than direct combat action. They understood with absolute clarity that their success in maintaining fake positions under enemy fire directly protected the lives of fellow American soldiers they would never meet, and that their personal courage in maintaining their deceptions while subjected to sustained German artillery attack was as valuable to the overall Allied war effort as the battlefield bravery displayed by infantry soldiers assaulting fortified enemy strongpoints or tank crews advancing against hostile armored formations. The lasting legacy of Operation Elephant extended far beyond its immediate tactical achievements and strategic contributions to Allied victory in Normandy.
The innovative techniques developed and systematically refined during those intense weeks of combat operations in occupied France would be applied in dozens of subsequent operations, from the liberation of Paris to the crossing of the Rhine River and the final Allied advance into Germany itself. The Ghost Army had successfully established itself as an essential and irreplaceable component of Allied military capabilities, proving definitively that creativity and sophisticated deception could achieve strategic objectives that conventional military force alone might not accomplish as efficiently or with as few casualties among Allied personnel.